if you set up a business, you have to set it up in a way that adds value to the world instead of reducing value on the whole. You do not want to be a parasite. You always want to be a symbiote. And so that was something that really influenced me as I was figuring out how to build this company. So the idea was always to never indulge in rent-seeking behavior, to always add more value than you extract, and to first focus on delivering value to customers. And only once you have delivered that value, then extract a fair amount of that value for yourself.
Welcome to the podcast of the French Tech Singapore. I'm your host, Nikolai. The wide availability of AI tools and APIs has changed the landscape of artificial intelligence and data science forever. Today, small companies and independent programmers can deliver more value to their customers than ever before and solve problems that not so long ago belonged in big research labs. Rishabh Srivastava is the founder and CEO of Loki.ai, a Singapore-based data science company. Rishabh describes himself as an independent, sustainable programmer. His work has recently been featured in the Times of India, and his research showing how Indian names may be linked to affluence and success has been widely covered. Right out of college, Rishabh only had 21 cents left in his bank account. After starting a first job as an AI engineer, he decided to go the freelance route and soon invested his savings to start Loki.ai, which has been profitable from day one. In our conversation, we talk about what it takes to be an independent AI developer and how Rishabh's values have been key in shaping the success of his company. We also discuss why companies rely on third parties to help them solve their machine learning data science problems, why rent-seeking behavior is a bad thing, how to attract AI talent, and why everyone should have their own tribe of superheroes. I had a great time talking to Rishabh. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Welcome, Rishabh.
Thanks so much for having me here, Nikolai.
We met a little while ago. We had a conversation about AI in the media because we get connected through podcasting. Mm-hmm. And I discovered that you have this company here in Singapore called Loki.ai. Mm-hmm. Could I ask you to give the 30-second elevator pitch?
Absolutely. We are an end-to-end data science company, and we provide value through every step in the information supply chain, from data scraping and acquisition to data analysis, to visualization, predictions, and even generative models based on data.
And you're focused on the media sector. We'll get into the why behind that a little bit later.
Right.
Now, one of the reasons I wanted you to come on the podcast, I want to have a longer conversation with you, is because you describe yourself as an independent, sustainable programmer, right? Which I find fascinating. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. I do not want to have a company where my clients don't know if the VC money is going to last a year from now. And because of that, they are reticent to sign a contract with me. We're entirely self-funded. We're profitable. We've been around for almost 2.5 years now. And for me, the idea is to always figure out how we can add value and how we can make money in a way that both adds value to our customers and allows us to extract a fair chunk of that value. And I do not see how being a VC-driven company at this point would allow us to do that. I have no interest in running a company where we're essentially losing money for the first 2 or 3 years and only then beginning to make a profit. I would much rather be profitable from day one, if possible.
So you're part of that segment of entrepreneurs that believe in having bootstrap profitable companies.
Absolutely, absolutely. Like, I am completely down with the indie hackers movement.
Me too. Yeah, I'm completely down with that. That's actually very empowering, right?
Absolutely. Like, when you realize that you can just focus on talking to customers and making great products instead of focusing on things that don't really add a lot of value, like talking to VCs and trying to fundraise, I think that really helps. It's also much harder, to be honest, because attracting talent is much harder if you're a bootstrap company. But I think apart from that, if you mostly want to do stuff by yourself, it's a fantastic model to go. And it's just fantastic to see more people adopting that model instead of trying to raise funds from day zero.
So you said I talked to you for the first time, I think something about 6 months ago, when it was still just you in the company. Do you have Is there more of you now?
Yes. I have 4 people working with me right now. None of them is on full time.
Right.
So it's still all people who are working part time. But it's good to not be lonely as you're banging your head against the wall,
right,
trying to solve a hard technical problem right now. Yep.
Especially the kinds of problems that you're trying to solve, because again, you're completely focused on AI.
Yeah. So what's really strange is that the word AI has just so many connotations right now, because there's AI that's snake oil, and then there's AI that actually really works. So there are things that I would still say are fairly easy if you're just looking at a simple classification problem. I do think that that's something that a solo entrepreneur can do fairly well. If it's just about classifying a bunch of images or a bunch of videos, what becomes much harder though is if you're trying to do anything that's cutting edge. If a paper has just come out and you're trying to incorporate it and integrate it into your own thing, it really helps to have other smart people with you, just hammering away at that. And especially right now when you have generative models, when almost every week you have a paper that tells you how deepfakes can be made better, or how you can essentially have a person acting as Donald Trump in a video, which is undetectable by a human eye. So those kinds of things, which are really empowering, which have a lot of uses, a lot of positive uses in the entertainment and media sphere in particular. It's always helpful to have more minds in there, because you can essentially try a bunch of different approaches and see what works better.
So let's focus on that vertical for a second. Why did you decide to focus on the media space, and how did you get started as an entrepreneur running Loki?
Right. So I had 4 companies that completely failed before Loki worked out. So when I was in college, I tried out a lot of different companies, and post-college, I had 21 cents left in my bank account. So then I essentially decided to become an AI engineer for a small company here in Singapore. Did that for 8 months. And once I had some savings in the bank, I decided to freelance for whichever client needed help with data and AI. And largely through a stroke of luck, I ended up getting a lot of media clients, because I ended up publishing a lot of my work on Reddit. Some of it unexpectedly went viral. And then a bunch of these editors from media companies reached out.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, and then they were like, hey, we saw that you've been doing interesting work, so do you want to do a project with us? So I did a bunch of freelance projects for about 2 years. And then I thought that, hey, I'm doing a lot of work that has these common core components. So it made a lot of sense then to just turn it into a company. And that act of converting my freelance projects into a proper company also allowed me to essentially start generating revenue from day zero, because I could just get my old clients and...
Right, yeah. So what kind of problems were your clients asking you to solve?
So they were fairly varied. So there was a company in Dubai which essentially wanted me to help predict what kind of articles would get more page views. So that essentially was a model that started off with just a simple analytics dashboard. And then the idea became, could we get these analytics in, and could we then have a model that in real time predicts, hey, this particular topic is hot right now, so you guys should start promoting a lot more of this. And so that was one.
Yeah.
Another bunch of clients from India essentially asked me to automate a bunch of articles for them. So if you think about these tasks that are repetitive, cognitive, right? So if, say, it's an article about the economy, if it's an article about inflation, if it's an article about commodity prices, these are all things which we kind of know that if this thing is moved in a certain way, it's a very repetitive article, because you have a bunch of rules, and then a person can just write an article about those based on those particular rules. Yeah. So we did a bunch of these automated visualization and automated article creation projects for a bunch of these clients in India. And then as that kind of grew, it went away from just analytics and content into things like, hey, can you tell me more about what kind of readers am I attracting? Is my health project which is aimed at millennial women actually attracting millennial women, or is it attracting a different demographic altogether? Right, so it basically started from content and content analytics, and then expanded to audience analytics as well.
You were doing all of this as a solo freelancer? Right?
So yes.
Or were you already working with people?
No. This was pretty much all as a solo freelancer. Yeah.
So what was the project that went viral?
Oh, you will be surprised. This was just a bunch of simple bar charts.
Really?
Yeah.
People love their bar charts.
I know. This wasn't even a bar chart race. This was like a simple PNG. So what I did was I essentially scraped the GCSE A-level equivalent for India because Indian cybersecurity is terrible. So this was all open data. You could just write a loop.
Open data?
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah. You could literally just write a loop to try out a random roll number. There were no captchas, and it would just give you results for that particular person. So
oh dear.
So I had results of about 11 million Indians. And then, because
seriously,
yeah,
oh my god,
yeah, it's terrible. They have cleaned up their act now, but back in the day, it used to be absolutely terrible. And because class is so correlated with caste in India, wherein your last name is fairly indicative of your social standing in many scenarios in the country still. So I just had a bar chart of your average score by last name, which ended up doing surprisingly well.
Wow, that's very interesting.
Yeah. So that was a really interesting case of big data presented simply leads to a lot of interest and interesting insights.
What I find interesting also when it comes to Loki.ai is that you seem to be very value driven. Yes.
So I essentially grew up in a fairly poor household. So when we were first growing up, it was like our entire family used to just have a one-room apartment, and we had to share a toilet with a bunch of other families living there. So growing up, a very common theme was essentially that businesses are evil, and you shouldn't really trust them. And so luckily that changed because my dad then, so this was at a time when India was just beginning to open up its market. So in 1991, India had a ton of economic reform, and it moved from a more socialist country to a more capitalist country. And because of that, my family essentially, so my dad who worked as a worker on a simple supply chain. So this was a factory that made these electron cathode ray tubes for those old TVs that used to be there.
Yeah.
And so he essentially went from someone who was super at a super low level to eventually really rising up in the organization and being one of the major managers of that place. And so a value I had into me growing up was, if you set up a business, you have to set it up in a way that adds value to the world instead of reducing value on the whole. You do not want to be a parasite. You always want to be a symbiote. And so that was something that really influenced me as I was figuring out how to build this company. And so the idea was always to never indulge in rent-seeking behavior, to always add more value than you extract, and to first focus on delivering value to customers, and only once you have delivered that value, then extract a fair amount of that value for yourself. So, I truly believed in this human-centered capitalism, and luckily I am in a situation where I can figure out what kind of company, what kind of organization I want to be a part of. And so it was almost a no-brainer to try and do something that makes me feel good and that does add more value to the world rather than be more parasitic.
And you can do that because you're profitable from day one.
Right.
So you're in charge of your own destiny.
Yeah. I don't have to grow at all costs.
So what would be an example of rent-seeking behavior for an AI consultancy?
Right. Lock-in is a huge one. So so what a lot of consulting companies do, and I'm not talking about any individual consulting company.
Of course.
But what a lot of companies do is they essentially claim that their model is something that is trained on proprietary data, and then right?
Yeah, I've heard this spiel. Yeah,
and very often they try and get their clients on these very long-term contracts, wherein the client is locked in, and even if say the technology improves in the next year or so, the client is still locked into this old contract, and they can't really move to a new thing without paying this consulting company a significantly larger amount of money, right? So what we do is one, we always tell our clients that, hey, we're going to train this thing on publicly available data sources, and if you want to essentially have a no lock-in version, we're also very happy to provide you with the source code used for training, along with the data we used for train for a slightly higher premium.
Which is perfectly reasonable.
Right, yeah. Because then the client essentially has an option on they can either choose to just go with our standard offering, or if they believe that, and especially right now, because a lot of these big companies, they don't have mature AI teams. So for them, the idea is that, hey, if I can actually have this code right now, maybe in 2 years when I do have an AI team, they don't have to start from scratch, right? So the whole thing about being transparent with what kind of data you use and what kind of models you use, that almost always helps. The second big thing is always attributing what papers you're basing your models on. Right, because typically especially with generative models, NVIDIA Labs, for instance, is doing some fascinating work right now. You have a lot of really interesting work coming out from academia as well. There's also this Korean company called Loki.ai, which just publishes fantastic papers. And so instead of just claiming that these other people's work is their own work, they always tell people that, hey, like this is the base model. This is how we have tweaked this model to meet our own needs. And if you guys want to use it moving forward, then here's all the documentation you need. And we also always tell them that, hey, if you want us to explain this stuff to you, you have to give us an hourly consulting fee. But we'll be more than happy to walk your entire team through the code base if needed, if the documentation as is doesn't work for you. So the idea has always been to be as transparent as possible and to prevent vendor lock-in. And weirdly enough, what we realized is, because we initially thought that that doing this would hurt revenues, but what happens is when you're this explicit about not trying to screw over your clients.
Turns out clients like that.
Exactly. So our revenues have really increased since we have started implementing these policies.
I love it. I love being so upfront about it. I love the fact that it's that makes the whole operation risk-free, right?
Less risky, rather.
Well, less risky in the sense that you know that whatever dollar you put into the project won't go to waste, right? Worst case, you will be able to recover the source code. You will be able to recover the academic sources that have been consulted. You will know what data was used.
Right.
And if at a later point in time you decide to actually hire a data team yourself or AI engineers yourself, you will be able to pick up the work. Because that's the biggest risk very often, right? That you end up with something that is essentially unusable.
No, absolutely. So again, to be fair, there is a small amount of risk still, which is even with the best efforts and the best models, we might end up just not being able to deliver. So there's like still a small amount of risk there.
Yeah.
Because especially with more ambitious projects. So we had this one project where a client wanted to turn humans into cartoons super easily.
Oh, okay.
Right. So the idea was, can you just take a video of two people acting out a skit, and then convert it into an animated cartoon that just works really well and looks like it was hand animated, because the thought process was, if you do this, the cost of animation just reduces dramatically. So it kind of worked, but it wasn't something that was good enough to be put in production. So you always have those kinds of risks with any AI project.
Yeah, I guess so. Especially when you're trying to push the boundary of what's possible, right?
Absolutely.
You're not just trying to implement some algorithm. You're trying to do something innovative.
Absolutely, yeah.
Especially in the AI space. Yeah. It's very interesting. So let's maybe we can focus on like one particular project. So we're recording this here in Singapore, and after this recording, you're going to give a talk on AI and how it can be used to supercharge your marketing. Maybe we can talk a little bit about this particular project to get into the details of what it is that you do.
Absolutely. So this was a project that had its origins in the Indian market. And what's fascinating about India is that you have a lot of really, really, really rich people. And then you also have a lot of people who are fairly destitute, but everyone right now has a smartphone. There are more smartphones in India right now than there are toilets, right? And the fascinating thing as a result of this is that anytime you have an online marketing campaign, you can have a campaign which gives you maybe 10,000 impressions, but you have no idea about what's the quality of those impressions. So, and the other big thing that happens, so I've had a number of clients who tried to do campaigns targeted at millennial women, and then once I've looked at the analytics, it turns out that they got 90% men in the people who interacted with it, right? So you essentially, what you want is anytime this happens, you want to put an early stop to it. So anytime, say, you're launching this campaign on Twitter or on Facebook, you just want to put a very, very early stop to it. So your marketing dollars don't go to waste on an audience that you just do not want. And so it's an interesting problem, right? Like how on earth do you solve this? So it turns out that names are a really good indicator of this. So for instance, your name is Nikolai. That's clearly a very, very male name, right? As compared to, say, if someone's name was Nina, then that would be a very, very female name. Right, and similarly from profile pictures as well on Twitter, on Facebook, you can know a lot about people. You can know what their rough age is. You can know what their rough ethnicity is. You can know what their gender is most of the time. And so building an AI model that in real time tells you, hey, this is the quality of an audience that you're attracting, and these are the demographic attributes. That really helps clients not waste money on campaigns that don't work. So this was a project that we started working on almost 3 years ago, and we essentially perfected it about 1.5 years ago, and now it's being used in production for a number of clients.
Very interesting. Was it something that clients were already doing manually, presumably?
No, because...
Not at all? They weren't looking into it?
So they were looking into it, but so again, the way things work in big companies is that even though a lot of people know that this is not working out, people are like, hey, this is outside my pay grade, like, it's just not working out. So people just thought of it as a cost of doing business.
Right.
And then they would look at these things maybe at the end of the month. And then the takeaway used to be, we need to improve the way we target people, right? But there's no way you can get a 100% success rate there. So the idea was, don't worry too much about are you targeting the right people or not until you actually start the campaign. And then once you, like the moment you get to maybe 500 impressions or so, run the algorithm, figure out what kind of audience you're attracting. And if it's not the audience you want, then you can just put an early stop to the campaign. So that was something that these guys were far happier with, because one, and again, I guess the way things work in a lot of big companies, but if you have a situation where no one is to blame, people love it.
Yeah, it's way better.
It's way better, right? Because then people are like, hey, if I use this thing, there's going to be no politics. There's not going to be fights about do the people who were in charge of the targeting filters, did they screw it up, or did the social media team screw it up? So this whole infighting in big companies is such a huge problem. And the more you automate it away, the more you realize that, hey, turns out if I do this thing, I just have data, and I have a model that doesn't complain, that doesn't need to go for a break every 30 minutes or so, that can work tirelessly, and that doesn't fatigue over time. Like this model is going to be as fresh, as good at decision making 12 hours down the line as on hour zero.
And it's not going to be influenced by corporate politics or by your incentive to deliver on something.
Yep.
Yeah, it's always going to come to the same conclusion.
Yep.
So do you just use the data that you could easily collect visually as a human when you click on the list of people that engage with your content? So first names, maybe ethnicity from a cursory glance, or do you annotate that data with other data sources? Do you enrich it somehow?
No, we do not enrich it right now. But the way the models are trained is actually trained on public data. So, so again, given how bad cybersecurity in India is, the address of every single registered voter is publicly available.
Wow.
Yeah. So you have these PDFs which essentially hold voter addresses and their names.
Oh dear.
I mean, again, like Holland used to have this before World War II, and then they realized that the Nazis were using this.
Yeah, and then something went horribly wrong. And
exactly. And for whatever reason, India, and to be fair, Indonesia has the same problem. Malaysia has the same problem. So you can actually figure out where people live just by looking at these electoral rolls. And so essentially what you can do is you have sources like that. You have sources which you can essentially augment from a pre-trained data set through Amazon Mechanical Turk. So if, say, you have a bunch of faces, you can put it on Mechanical Turk. You can just ask people to label these faces as whatever ethnicity or whatever classes you are interested in.
What's the cost associated with Mechanical Turk for annotation? Is it?
Oh, it's super cheap. It's super cheap. It's it goes as low as 1 cent for 10 images.
Oh wow!
Yep. So it's up to you to put whatever cost you want to pay your Mechanical Turk workers, and Amazon gets a 20% cut of this. Which is fair enough.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah. And so it's really up to you. Like whatever cost you think is fair, you can just put it out there.
How about data quality? Is it okay?
You mean the
annotation quality?
So you should never rely on a single person. So typically, what I do is the same images is labeled by at least 5 different people.
Oh, okay.
Right, and then that just allows you to
majority vote.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, because since the costs are so low, you can easily do that.
Yeah. It's honestly fantastic. And now the other fantastic thing is people used to have this notion that, hey, you need terabytes of data to train these deep learning models on. That is a myth which is being perpetuated by AI consulting companies that just want to fleece their clients for money.
Yeah, it's actually amazing how far you can get with limited data sets, right?
Absolutely. And the reason for this, and like I'm sure you know this, but just for your audience, it's something called transfer learning, wherein if you have a pre-trained model, so there are a lot of models there. There's something called ImageNet, there's something called ResNet. So these are all models which have been trained on petabytes of data, and they've all been publicly released. And then all you need to do is maybe train it over 1,000 or 2,000 images and just fine-tune the pre-existing model a little, and you get fantastic results.
Yeah. And very few. Well, it's not something that's commonly touched upon.
Yep.
Yeah. Let's put it that way, because essentially people have a vested interest in saying that they're somehow doing all of this work.
Yeah.
Right. That's very interesting. And so then that does give you the possibility to say, okay, so it's 20% of the people that are engaging with your product or your ad are ethnically Chinese. Are female, and have this information come up in regular reporting so that people can make informed decisions or whether or not to go forward with their campaigns?
Right. So we essentially have 2 ways that this is used. The first is, so both Facebook and Twitter have these ad manager APIs. So what you can do is you can just have a cron job that runs every 5 minutes automatically, checks for what kind of audience you're getting. And if it turns out that this is not the audience you want, then you can just use the API to stop that ad without any human intervention at all. So that's something that our clients really prefer, because that essentially just saves them a lot of money without any headaches whatsoever. And the second thing, of course, is more of these analytical reports, wherein even if it's not a paid campaign, but you just want to figure out what kind of demographics is a particular kind of content attracting for me, right? Or even what kind of things are most divisive amongst my user base. So you'll be very surprised. But so what would you think has been the most racially divisive story in Singapore over the last 2 years?
Racially divisive in Singapore, the blackface story, maybe?
Nope.
No?
Nope.
Oh, dear. What was it?
Subway.
Subway?
Yeah. So Subway essentially decided to stop selling pork-based goods. And essentially, Subway decided to become completely halal. And so if you look at the emojis on Facebook, so the angry emoji was predominantly Chinese, and the love emoji was predominantly Malay.
Wow.
Right. And so what's fascinating, so because even with something like the whole brown face saga in Singapore, that was something where you had a lot of Indian people like me who essentially were like, this is not a big deal, like you guys are just being way too politically correct. And then you had a lot of more left-leaning liberal Chinese people being upset about it. So that wasn't that racially divisive.
Right, yeah, interesting.
But the whole Subway thing was absolutely racially divisive. So, I mean, and to be honest, that was quite heartening to see, because if you look at the stories that are divisive in places like India or Pakistan, those tend to be really ugly stories.
Right, yeah.
So, this was like, go Singapore.
This is in the end a very cute anecdote.
Yeah.
It's not anything serious, it's just a sandwich.
Yeah.
Right. You're bringing these capabilities to companies that are, I would say, mature enough to realize that they need more powerful analytics, but perhaps don't have the capacity to develop this in-house, or don't want to hire AI teams right yet, or maybe cannot find the talent. What are the reasons behind them not doing it in-house, in your experience?
So, honestly, the biggest reason is that you do have some really, really smart mid-managers and senior managers, but they aren't given the resources to hire a big enough AI team.
Oh.
And so typically, and the other main thing is, they have an idea that, hey, like, this thing might be possible. Like, I would love it if there was a service like this. But in their head, they just, like, very often they just don't even think that AI can help solve this problem. So in their head, it's like, man, if I were to hire like a data entry team, or if I were to hire a bunch of low-level people to help me solve this particular problem, that's going to cost me a lot of money. And that's where I think content marketing has been super, super useful. So what I've been trying to do is just to publish these posts about, hey, like, I built this cool new thing with AI. And I've been trying to get as much media coverage of those things as possible. And very often what happens is it's republished in some media publication. And then you would have some person running a big department in a big company reach out saying that, hey, I saw this particular thing you posted on this particular website. I didn't know that AI could do this. Could we get on a call and you can tell me more?
Because you were recently covered in the India Times, if I remember correctly.
Times of India, yes.
Times of India,
yes. So those kinds of things have really helped, like essentially just educating people about the possibilities. Because again, these are all people who have deep domain expertise in their particular field. They just don't know much about AI. So if you can just reach out to them, tell them that, hey, like I'm happy to try out this thing with you. The other thing which we really try to do with new clients, because especially when I'm the one making this particular pitch, I am 27 years old right now. So a lot of the times these guys just don't take the company seriously enough. And there's a lot of perceived risk. And so essentially just making your customers aware that, hey, we're happy to do this particular thing where let's just decide on some prearranged metrics. And so if we don't hit these metrics, like maybe this particular accuracy score on your data set, then you only pay us 20% of this contract cost that we agreed on, right? And if we do hit the whole thing, then you can just pay us the whole thing. So doing all of those things to help de-risk this thing for companies as much as possible, that's really useful. Because again, for VC-funded companies, it's a lot easier because they can show a huge team on their back end. They can essentially put a lot of big names as advisors. But if you're an independent company that's talking to a Fortune 500 level company which has billions of dollars in revenue, I think they're naturally a lot more suspicious of you until you deliver those results. And so just laying out the lay of the land for them, telling them that, hey, like this is all the stuff that AI can do, working with their teams to figure out good use cases for them. And once you have done that, like when it comes to contract negotiations, just being very upfront that, hey, like in order to de-risk this thing for you, if it doesn't work, you like just pay us maybe 20% of the agreed upon cost. So that tends to be like a pretty effective way of getting them on board.
Yeah, I would guess so. I mean, and that's again a very honest and upfront way of approaching the client, right? It's something that I would definitely appreciate. Yeah.
And I mean, honestly, there's something you have to do as a young company, because if you don't, then there's always a question of, hey, like if you're going to charge us this amount of money, but we have no idea about whether this thing is going to work for you or not.
Right. Yeah.
Like most of the times, these guys are going to ask you to lower your price by a lot. Because of the whole risk associated with it. So if you actually want to get a fair price for your services, and if you believe that what you're offering does have value, it's a pretty effective model.
So right now, from what you're saying, your clients are mostly inbound, right? You don't do any active, not too much business development. You're media savvy. You get a lot of exposure on the projects that you do publish. I
would say so. I mean, like to be honest, going to conferences is something that I still do. So anytime there's a news conference or anytime there's an event about the media industry, I do try to go in for those. But apart from that, there isn't a lot. Yeah, like apart from that, it's mostly inbound.
So I have a question for you. How do you? So you've been growing quite a lot, right? 6 months ago it was just you. Now you have 4 people working with you, even though they might not be working for you full time. There is a talent shortage, or at least that's what people keep saying. How do you cope with that? How do you cope with that shortage versus your ambition to scale this? Do you find that your values help you in attracting talent? Could you speak to that?
No, absolutely. Oh man, like they help so much, because so one of the main reasons why talent comes to work with us is one of the clauses in our contract is any technology that you develop here, which hasn't been developed like before you, but you essentially develop for this particular company, you're free to use it for your own purposes in the future. So the idea there is that
this is unheard of, right? Basically,
I don't know of a lot of people that do this.
I would say it's very rare,
right?
Yeah.
And the thing is, you have a lot of really smart people who are maybe grad students right now, or who have just graduated from college, who want to work on these interesting projects. And typically what happens is, like for a lot of companies, it's that, hey, even if you do something on your personal time, if you've done it on a company-provided laptop, that's a company's property, which to me is a really predatory practice. So what we do is there's a very clear clause wherein if you want to use it for your own projects, you are happy to use it. For something which will directly compete with Loki, that's something which we will not allow unless there is like a written agreement for that. But
you even stipulate that there might be a written agreement.
Right.
So I mean, they can basically strike a deal. Right.
They could. I mean, of course. If it turns out that they're able to charge like 5x of what we would be able to, then of course I'll be like, hey, like go ahead, just give me a cut of that. But typically, so like as an example, say if someone works on a GAN, so that's a generative adversarial network. That's something that's used to create these images, right? And then it turns out that they have a use case for it which I'm not addressing at all. Then like they're basically free to set up a company using that technology. So that I think is the number one thing that has helped me get the kind of talent I have had so far. The other big thing has been to try not to fleece people. So anytime there is an agreement for how much should a person be paid, now very often what happens is, say if it's a very smart person in a place like Sri Lanka or India, they're worth a lot, but they have no idea about how much they're worth. And so it doesn't always happen, but if say someone is offering to work for a wage I would consider really low, I just like tell them, hey, like what you're asking for is pretty low for what you offer. So like, because very often people just are just like, hey, you can pay me the equivalent of 30 Singapore dollars an hour, right? Which is ridiculously low. So in those cases, you can be like, hey, like I'm happy to pay you a lot more than that because that's what the kind of work you're doing is worth. With the condition that if you don't perform, so again, that like we have a bunch of these metrics for what's a successful project versus what's not. You wouldn't be paid the full amount. So again, that like there is a performance component to it, but that is to be as fair as possible. Like,
on a project to project basis.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. So again, like that performance component can be for a classification problem is just your classification accuracy, or it could just be your area under curve score for any kind of classifier issue, or like again, like AI projects. The good thing is that they're very computable. So
right.
you actually can put these really hard numerical limits, just to make it fair for both parties.
Well, and in the end, it's still very interesting, right? They were expecting to get paid less. You're offering them more, but adding some performance constraints, which I think is completely reasonable.
Yeah.
So is it mostly, are you looking mostly into these countries in the region to find your talent? Or do you think there's a lot of talent here in Singapore, or is it easier for you to work with?
So there is a lot of talent in Singapore, but it's expensive talent.
Yeah.
Right. So Singapore has some insanely smart people, but they tend to know how much they're worth, and so very often the whole idea is that between working with me or working with like an Accenture or a Palantir, it's almost a no-brainer because at this point I can't really match the salaries of a Palantir or an Accenture. The other big thing is that pretty much all the work I offer right now is part-time, not full-time, because I myself am not entirely 100% on this is definitely the market segment we're going to go after, right? Like a year from now, I might realize that, hey, like maybe finance is a market segment that works much better for us. And so I don't want to hire full-time people at this particular point in time. So, and like people in Singapore, those who are really good at data science, they already have full-time jobs which preclude them from working part-time anywhere else.
Right.
So that becomes an issue. Having said that, Scandinavia has been a huge source of talent. College students in Denmark in particular have been a huge source of talent.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
Eastern Europe at all, or?
So I haven't really. So I haven't really looked at Eastern Europe because of the language constraints. Right. Like the good thing about Western Europe and Scandinavia is that everyone speaks excellent English. Yeah. So and like where I've been getting talent from Europe has mostly been in design. So there have been a lot of people who are super interested in how can we have good design when it's an AI that's creating this particular page, right? Because unlike, say, a typical project where you know that this is exactly what the web page is going to look like, in this thing you can have like totally different things. So like I have worked with 2 people from Copenhagen in the past who have been like excellent hires. So would recommend them like that particular area very, very strongly. So
you're telling me you're an Indian entrepreneur outsourcing your work to Nordic European countries. I salute you, sir. I salute you. You've hacked the system. I love it. So to finish up, I'd like to get into something else I noticed while I was browsing. So again, you're very focused on these values, which I think offer you, which create a lot of business value, actually, I think, for your clients and for you, right? It's a very positive dynamic. Mm-hmm. And I noticed that one of your personal values, which I found on your personal website, not so much on the Loki website, was you said something about surrounding yourself with a team of superheroes. Mm-hmm. Are you comfortable talking about that?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I call it the tribe of superheroes principle, wherein the idea is you essentially don't want to be doing everything by yourself because you're going to hit a ceiling very, very, very soon. And so working with people, talking to people who are smarter than you are, like I love being the dumbest person in the room as much as possible.
I couldn't agree more. It's fantastic.
Yeah. And And especially people who are hyper specialized in things like design or in things like a particular subfield of AI. So I'm someone who's a very broad practitioner, but I don't go super deep, right? As compared to, say, if you're talking about natural language processing, and then there's someone who is extremely passionate about BERT-based transformers, then it makes perfect sense for me to hire this person for a short amount of time, learn as much as I can from them, and hopefully also show them the ropes of, hey, like, you're an amazing tech person, and this is how you can kind of do cool things with business as well. So that has worked really well. The other big thing has just been surrounding yourself with people who are very goal-oriented. So even if it's not people you directly work with, but so I love hanging out with people who are endurance athletes, because you just talked like I got this idea from a friend who runs ultra marathons, and his thing was you can completely Pavlov yourself, wherein he told me how he didn't like running, but he loved reading, and then he got really into audiobooks, which he could listen to while he was running, and that to him like just created this incentive to run more. And I was like, hey, that is fantastic. So I tried to adopt that, and I think it's only when you surround yourself with people who are much better than you are, and who are extremely good, extremely driven at what they do, that just allows you to think better. That allows you to kind of get all of these cheat codes and life hacks into your own life, and really like in terms of producing great work, you always want to be able to call upon friends who you know are amazing at what they do, and could really add a lot of value to your particular project as well.
That's fantastic, and I completely agree, and I would even add that for me personally. One of the things I like about that also is that it allows you to put it in IT terms, I guess, to challenge your models. Right, you think you know things. You might be wrong. You have, you know, if you don't expose yourself to people who are capable of challenging your models, maybe because they're coming from a completely different background, they have a completely different point of view, from a completely different angle, what it is that you're doing or that you're thinking about, you just get stuck.
No, absolutely, Nicola. Like you just talked about implementing adversarial learning in real life.
Yes.
So absolutely, couldn't agree with that more.
Well, there you go. Well, that's a great place to wrap it up.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here, Nicola.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yeah, cheers.